All right. Hello and welcome to the virtual Kansas City SQL Server user group. Tonight we're bringing out the new year with Tracy Boggiano and her session Deep Dive into the World of SQL Audit. For the audience, if I don't botch something up, this session is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Once the recording is ready, I will place the link inside the meetup event. For questions, Tracy will have specific time slots where she checks in for questions. Just plop them in the chat or come off mute when she does that if you have any. So on that note, welcome Tracy, and thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
Thank you.
SQL Audit always feels like that underrated thing that we all need, but we don't know about it until we really need it. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
Yes, it is. I unfortunately became a topic expert on it at DocuSign. Unfortunately, I know more about it than I want to know about.
Yeah.
Because I got stuck implementing it because we took on government work there, and part of DISA compliance is having SQL Audit turned on, and I had to performance test the heck out of it and turn it on and make it not hurt. And it hurts if you turn it on by default and you don't have the hardware to support it. But if you go by DISA compliance, anyways.
Yeah. Oh, I imagine.
Because they want you to audit everything.
I worked on government projects. I know how that goes. All right. So I'm going to let you take over at this point and let us all fall into the deep dive.
And I have my screen shared, I assume?
Yes, you do.
All right, just wanted to make sure. And Teams disappeared on me. Come back, Teams. I'll make sure I can see the chat. Okay. So I have retitled this thing because I made it kind of superhero-y after my database name. So it's now inside the heroes layer. I dive into the heart of SQL Audit superpowers. Makes it sound, a little bit more entertaining. Because, I go by database superhero in the SQL community, mainly because of all my volunteer work, which I'm only going to talk about 2 items on this whole slide deck because you'll see a whole bunch of icons after this. So I am Tracy Boggiano. I'm known as a database superhero in the SQL community. My email address is tracy@tracyboggiano.com. I do a lot of volunteer work, but the thing that I pride myself on the most is my work with the foster care system. I have been a North Carolina guardian ad litem for 20 years. As of this past June, I have advocated for 67 children over that 20-year time period, which means I have been their advocate in court and basically, guided them through the court system and made sure their best interests were taken care of as they've been in foster care. I am currently the president of the board of directors for the Foster Family Alliance of North Carolina, which is a bigger undertaking than I thought it was going to be. I started off as a board member last year in April, and became treasurer. And the next thing I knew, I don't know, I became president. I don't know how these things happen to me. But I'm a chronic volunteer person, as you can see by all these icons and stuff. I say I'm a volunteer-holic. It's my coined word. So, but basically, I can be found somewhere trying to make a difference, and I do lots of different things over the things. So basically, our heroes agenda for today is we're going to go through training days, making sure we understand what SQL Audit is and how it got started. Our hero's life on-prem, looking at some hidden powers and special moves, going through how you would set up a command center as far as centralized reporting goes, and then just summing up how we mastered our superpowers. So the origin story of our superhero is basically, in a world that was overwhelmed by chaotic data and looming security threats, we had a cry for a protector. Basically, that would be the backdrop for how SQL Audit was born. We had unmanaged data access, the lack of transparency, and SQL breaches. I remember SQL 2000 and being hired at a job because Black Tuesday occurred at this site. And basically someone wiped out all their data, and a lot of their security was they had usernames and passwords that were exactly the same, and they all had data reader, data writer, or sysadmin or data DB owner. I wonder who deleted the data. No one could figure it out. because, SQL 2000 and, everybody had access to everything, including the app to do anything it wanted to do. So, there was this product called Lumigen that could read the logs and pull stuff in, but they didn't own that at the time and they bought it. And guess what? They never used it. But, hey. But this is why, we have the birth of SQL Audit. It came in SQL 2008. And the reasons that we have it are basically because, we couldn't do this and we needed security compliance and nobody knew who was accessing anything or doing anything against the system and when it was occurring and who was deleting what and what system changes were happening, who created a database, who changed the compatibility level, who made any type of change to the system, who just seen the data. That's important to know, who's looking at patient data. I work for a healthcare company now. So who's looking at data? So SQL Audit enters as our database guardian and looks over our system to see who's looming as our database threats. And it offers us database protection and threat deterrence and compliance assurance. Now that we have, HIPAA compliance, started off we had SOX compliance because of Enron and stuff like that. But now we got HIPAA compliance, GDPR, DISA, PCI, all kinds of different compliances that we have to do. And it starts off by guarding our data integrity, giving us real-time monitoring happening right when it's occurring. It gives us precision of the auditing that's occurring, targeted audits, and avoiding redundant checks and different things that are going on. It protects us against ongoing vigilance, continuously checking against potential threats and making sure things are happening. So it's constantly checking things and ensuring that compliance against regulatory compliance, the HIPAA and stuff. And you're getting consistent updates against things that are happening. So you can constantly update your compliance and change your SQL audit as needed for whatever the compliance, regulatory, and government agencies decide you need to change it to. They may decide one day you need to audit this and, in the next version of SQL, you've got to change it to something else because every version of SQL is a little bit different and they have different compliance regulations. So as things change, they add new audit components into the different versions of SQL. So that's the basics of how things got started. So on to training days and understanding how our hero was born and the foundations of its superpowers. So as we mentioned, every hero is, basically born out of necessity, and SQL Audit was born out of necessity to be able to manage our data and see what was going on, our security concerns, and the growing need of the industry need to know what was happening for a solution to know what was going on because we didn't have anything that pre-SQL 2008 days. So our initial version, we get the release day of 2008. Around that time, we get a bunch of updates that occur as upgrades happen, and different enterprises start adopting it because some people don't actually know that SQL Audit exists, which surprises me to no extent. But it's because, as Christina mentioned before, it's an unsung feature of SQL Server that a lot of people don't notice is there. A lot of people try to implement other things like extended events or triggers and things like that because that's what they know and they see, and they don't understand SQL Audit as much. So this is when the versions that became available. If you're still using 2008 to 2014, I'm sorry because it's not supported. Run away, hurry up, upgrade, or 2012. I think 2014 is still supported for a little bit longer, or may not be. I don't remember the exact dates, but hurry up, upgrade at least 2016 so you're on a supported version of SQL, and it'll be available in all editions. We want that, but we should probably at least do 2016 SP1 so you get all editions, and you don't have to have enterprise to go down to the database level, and that way you can audit everything that you need to be able to audit for your security compliance. But let's talk about building the hero's foundation, because every hero has like a foundation. It has, Batman has his cave, the Fabulous Four have its foundation that it went to. I can't remember all the little quirky things that it did.
Love it.
I tried to build superhero things into it, then I forget the little little things into it. So, but we want to start off by, the core foundations are making sure that it's scalable. We have the security in place for things, and it's very flexible. So when it comes to security, the scalability of it is you can set it up across your different environments. It's per server. We're talking on-prem only, because when I tried to build Azure into this, I only made it like halfway through my slides. So you want to make sure it's scalable by setting it up per server. Your security, it by default is set up where no one can change it but the sysadmin or the people that are part of the security group, and it logs who changes it if you set it up to audit the SQL audit. Kind of ironic. And it's very flexible because you can change things on the fly. You can set up filters and you can tell it which things you want to audit. So each component of the fortress and their roles. One, you have the audit engine, which is basically extended events behind the scenes. And all it is a pared down version of extended events. That's all audit engine is extended events just set up to be SQL audit and isolated down to have the security component, so where people can't actually change it and mess with the logs themselves without it being compromised. And then you've got the log management that it does behind the scenes to make sure that it rolls over and that it archives it and things like that, and it keeps it to a certain size. And you can actually set it up to reserve the space, where if you tell it, like, I want 5 files at 100 megs, it'll make sure that 500 megs is reserved on the disk space, or it won't actually start up the SQL Server. So you can make sure that you actually have enough space for the log files, unlike extended events, where if you tell it to write out files for extended events, it won't necessarily make sure you have enough space for the extended event files, but you can actually make sure that you reserve the space for SQL audit to make sure that you actually are capturing the data. So, superheroes, they have to have the arsenal and gears. Batman has a cave full of stuff. Captain America, he just has a shield. He's my favorite, but he still has his arsenal and gear. He has a shield and his, ability to do all kinds of stuff because he, had stuff done to him in the 50s, or was it the 60s, or 20s or 30s, somewhere around that time frame. I get my time frames messed up. But the core tools of SQL Audit is being able to have audit actions in groups. And that's where it's saying, okay, for the database level, I want to be able to target, I want to do all the selects, updates, deletes, and inserts. That's my audit actions. And then you got target types and event modules that go into that. And they tell you, the target types tell you the destinations of where you want to store your audit logs. You can do that to the file, which is where I normally store things, but you could also do it to the security log, the Windows security log or the application log, and query the data out that way and have it set that way. The event modules are the components that track your specific actions and logs, like the login or the object access. Now, some enhanced capabilities that we get with our arsenal and our gear are the ability to filter. So one of the things I filtered out when I worked at a company was the monitoring software, because it was a killer when it came to performance, because monitoring software just, plummets your system when it has to write all that data down to SQL Audit, because it just, constantly checking your system for stuff. So I filtered out that user and immediately got, big performance improvements. Then, like on my data warehousing system, one of the things my reporting system, one of the things it did was it constantly queried the system tables to figure out what columns and tables were in there, and just filtering all that out so people could custom pick their reports and stuff. And that's just unnecessary data it didn't need to have. I filtered out replication. The auditors don't need to know that replication is running, that replication is doing its thing behind the scenes. It's not a user accessing the system doing something. So those type of things you can actually filter out. And in your data capture mode, you're telling it whether to, capture all the data or capture it by that filter. So when you're doing that, you're isolating the data down and telling it, hey, I want to have better performance by doing this. And the retention policy is just telling it, hey, once I get to this size of a data log or this much data in the application of security log, this is when you want to roll over the data and erase it. One of the things you want to do when you're on security compliance is make sure you're importing that data into some sort of system so that you can read it later and make sure you're keeping enough data time-wise for auditors rather than by size. So you've got to look at those type of things. And this is all kind of a manual thing you got to set up when you do SQL Audit, because SQL Audit does by size and not by time. And when you get into reporting, you got to do some manual stuff there. That's why we get into the central command center and the strategy for how to set those up in module 4. So these are the different server and database specifications that you can set up as part of your system. You've got the audit level action groups that you can set up, and that's just monitoring who's changing the actual SQL audit itself. You know, you want to know if some sysadmin comes in there and changes the audit itself and makes it do something it wasn't supposed to do or enhances it. Then you got server level audit action groups, and that's server level specifications like creating databases, changing, server level configs like, max dot, things like that. Database level audits, when you go into the actual specific databases themselves and start changing you can change something on a database level, like creating tables, change the compat mode, or actually selecting the data and editing the data, or changing schemas and things like that. It's anything inside the database itself. And those are the different levels you can do. And those are 3 separate audits that you could set up and actually have set up to run things. Any questions so far? Not seeing any in the chat. So I will keep going. So our hero's life on-prem, we want to look at how he's done it on-prem. This is the traditional stronghold of our superhero. He started off on-prem because there really wasn't Azure at the time. 2008 was around Azure was getting started and stuff. So he's always been stable inside his little castle on-prem and built his walls up to manage this realm of database management. And this is giving us our stability and control, and we've had really defined perimeters by being on-prem. And by being on-prem, we've also had built-in physical security measures and direct access controls that have already been built into where people could only physically access the server because they were in our data center, and directly access the server by going to the keyboard and getting to it. So we already had some physical limitations to being able to get to the server by doing this. So by doing this, we protected our legacy systems and our processes by being inside our castle, because most of the time, way back then in 2008, a lot of these data centers were in the same building that we worked in and not off-prem in a data center. And we had more control over how these systems were accessed. So we were very vigilant about how we patrolled our systems and kept these things inside our walls, and we protected it with our physical servers with direct access. But as we've moved on to navigating the world of SQL Audit, it became more of a central stage, and we had to have more oversight into how things were set up. So we had to set up and initialize a process for getting SQL Audit into place. So we had to configure our necessary parameters and tailor it to our environment. And this had to set up initial baseline and protocols to ensure that we were consistent in our auditing practices. Once we set the stage, we had critical events that became our key players, and we had to select what events and things that we had to prioritize. Again, when I was at a company, we had to dump every select statement that DISA wanted every select statement to be audited. But if we did that, it took down production. One of my coworkers implemented DISA while I was at a doctor's appointment, even though I told him not to. And it literally took down production because he put it in as is without any testing. I told him not to do this because it needed testing first, because it records a lot of stuff. So after lots of testing later, after I did 3 months worth of testing, we managed to put it into production with lots of filters and a few things taken out, including selects, with no impact to production. But you once you put the stuff in there, you've got to actually monitor your user actions and your database transactions that are going against your system, and make sure you're not hurting performance, and keep an eye on these significant activities to make sure that audit's not killing you, based on your performance and make sure you actually are getting your critical events that you need to capture as well. Because you may not need to do every selected hit system. You may only need to do certain tables or columns that are being hit instead of every table. I mean, who cares if you're hitting a config table? You may, but you may not. You may just care about hitting the patient table and the data that's in that particular table, but you only may care about a subset table, because I got a patient table that has like 200 columns in it on one company I was at, and I don't really care about all but like 10 columns that have the actual PII data in it. So, but you also care about your logging mechanism. So, because with every performance record that you hit, it takes up space and it takes up memory consumption trying to find things the bigger these logs get. So you got to consider your storage considerations, where you're putting them, and the size, and how you're backing these up, because by default these go into like your program files, log directory, blah blah blah, that's in there. And if you're just putting them local, you may not be backing them up, because your backups you're putting somewhere hopefully not local, but these you probably wouldn't be. So you want to make sure you're offloading those at some point to some centralized place, because your auditors are going to get mad if they get lost. So you're going to want to make sure you do that, or import them into a table of some sort. Now, the way to retrieve them and analyze them is with this function that's on the screen, and you can use that and dump them straight into a table, put them in a centralized location, and do some reporting off of them. And that would be the best way probably to have a backup of them, is to daily or hourly just import what data is new and have it in a centralized location and be able to do some reporting off of it. And that way you don't have to worry too much about having to back them up to a different location and copy all these files around to different places. So diving a little bit deeper and tailoring SQL Audit to your specific work needs. Like every superhero, they have to adjust their tools based on their needs. That's why Batman has so many different things in his cave, and he's always playing with the technologies and has his company working on stuff, because you got to customize things. So you got to adjust the parameters to fit your specific needs. By doing this, you're going to be enabling, disabling features, implementing custom auditing scenarios. For example, you may have certain times of days where you need to change your audit parameters. I've had places where we've had to turn off audit of specific things during certain time windows, because an application did something weird that we didn't need to audit during that particular time window. So we would filter out an application during a particular time window and then turn it back on after that time window. And this was approved by auditors because of the particular stuff that it did. So sometimes you have certain things you need to do. And with your granular auditing, you would focus more on specific tables or stored procedures. You may only have a subset of things that you need to audit, rather than every single execution that happens. You may only target certain users or certain database roles. So one thing you want to make sure is that you monitor with precision. You don't necessarily want to go in and audit everything under sun. The best thing to do is test it out on test system, see what you get, sum up everything by the groups and actions, and see where you get the most things at, and filter out by that, and see what you can take out, and try to filter as much as you can out of the scenario, so that you are getting the less data, because the more noise you have in there, the less likely you are to find anything useful when it's time to find something bad that has happened. And by doing this, you'll be optimizing for performance. You'll minimize the audit overhead because you'll have less data to filter through. You'll be writing less data, plus the less it's got to collect, the better performance you'll get. You won't be hurting the CPU and the memory on the system by being selective about it, and it'll effectively help you manage your logs. By mastering your performance balance in SQL Audit, it's very hard, because the auditing dilemma, the more you see, the more it goes slow. But you got to find that sweet spot. So by choosing the events to audit, you get more effective oversight without bogging down the system. But it is a continuous adjustment process because periodically you're going to need to review and reconfigure your system to adapt to whatever's changing your system, because your developers are constantly releasing new features, your data needs are changing, things are changing. So you've got to watch your resource utilization. You got to pay attention to what your audit overhead is, recognizing the cost of the detailed auditing on the server performance. So you want to take advantage of your monitoring tools and benchmark what you had before you implemented the audit, after you implemented the audit, and see what's happening, see what those impact zones are, see what's happening to your CPU, your memory, and your IO based on what you implemented, and keep those numbers handy. Put them in your wiki, your Confluence pages, or wherever you keep data for when you implement changes later, so you can see what you need to change at a later point in time. So as a conclusion in this section, I believe it's the last slide in this section, you've got these emergent threats from SQL audits, and your defense mechanism that our heroes using to keep off our tigers. It is to make sure we're taking care of our common threats, our data breaches, our unauthorized access, and even SQL injection, because you can find those things. And our emerging threats from ransomware and insider threats from employees that we might be letting go, and phishing attacks from people receiving emails. We're going to use SQL Audit's defensive arsenal to monitor our user activities, who did what and when. Hey, that's a podcast. I love that podcast. Oh, sorry, sidetrack. Sensitive data protection, guarding the crown jewels of our database. I mean, we want that, and making sure we're compliant with the regulatory compliance, meeting our standards with the GDPR and HPR, and getting a constant feedback loop and seeing what needs to be adjusted and changed, and actually looking at the data to see if there's things that need to be changed. So some hidden superpowers and special moves that a superhero has, because they all have their innate abilities to truly, and they need to truly harness their powers, but it's not about having capabilities, it's about mastering them and refining them and pushing their boundaries that help them achieve success. At least that's what I see superheroes do. So we'll see how we can do some of this with SQL Audit. One way is we're going to look at unearthing some of the secrets that make it powerful, which is mostly around filtering and how to do that. And we're going to master the art of that, and we'll see what some of the power within that is. Hopefully all that makes sense. So one of the things we notice is SQL Audit has some hidden talents, and one of the things is in the filtering. So we think of this as a superhero's precision strikes that he takes when he goes in and Captain America slams down his shield. Sorry, he's my favorite. And he's discriminating about where he uses his power. So we've got to do the same thing with our filtering. So we need a need for nuances. We've got to be specific in what we do. The fundamentals of filtering, you've got to revisit the foundations of what you're filtering. The filtering is very nuanced with SQL Audit. It doesn't really do parentheses where you can put two things together. It's like separated out, and you can't put double parentheses to put things together is what I'm trying to say. And you can put like single parentheses, but if you try to double up things, it doesn't do it. Even if you put in the GUI that way, it undoes it later when it saves it. So you have to be really specific on how you do it, and pay attention to how you do it, and save it, and then see how it actually comes back out, and take it one piece at a time as you're doing it. And and that's how you get to your optimal performance. Is you got to balance it out by thoroughly going through your filtering and making sure it works one piece at a time. Get some data out, refilter it with that function that was at the beginning, sum up the data, and see what you're actually getting, and filter it down. And we're going to see this in an example when I get to the example slide, the examples on my blog. So the formula for filtering is, one, identify the noise. Again, when I was identifying noise, when I worked on this at DocuSign for further filtering, my first big noise was the monitoring solution. That filtered out over half our stuff. Then I filtered out all the selects, because that was the other half of our stuff. Then I just got nuanced into the different things that were system processes that, hey, yeah, replication's running, but no one needs to see it. Why would an auditor care that a system process is running? And then we just went fine-tuned down from there to the point where you can't even tell SQL audit's running because of the different things that auditors didn't need to see. And your components of filtering, you break down the filter conditions and the criteria, and you just keep building on them one by one. And I just kept making ands after ands after ands and a couple of ors here and there with the parentheses because you can't double them up. So you had to be real specific about the different things. And the best thing I could do was keep filtering them out where this wasn't equal to this, and it wasn't equal to that, and it wasn't equal to this, and then, one by one. And I just kept fine tuning those filters. It took me 3 months to implement a SQL audit because of all the performance testing I had to do and the fine tuning I had to do on those filters. And, I became a subject matter expert because I literally spent 3 months on it, between that and trying to get QA to give me the QA environment to do it. So some real world scenarios where our superhero might be bustling about our city and trying to take care of some of our database woes is, we've got sensitive data access. We've got patient data. At DocuSign, we had who would sign what, and there's no telling what kind of data was in those documents that we would want to sign away. You might have DML operations when data is being manipulated. You want to know who changed what, when, where, and why. I mean, you won't know why, but you've got configuration changes on your servers. You want to know who changed permissions on the server, who changed server properties, who changed settings, who's done anything to your server. Those are important things to know. And you may just want to know that in general without compliance regulations. Why did MacStop change? Why, what, who has access to do this stuff? And why are they changing it? And who's not actually putting in tickets for this stuff? Because sometimes people do that. So your best practice when it comes to filtering, because, every toolkit we always have best practices that we try to follow, is make sure you do focus on narrow down your search criteria to only your essential databases. Make sure we do performance checks regularly on how to monitor if we're filtering enough to make sure we keep our speed down. Make sure we try to make it reusable. One thing I found when I was designing the filters is that it was very convoluted how some of the stuff was done. And if you try to put comments into SQL Audit in the GUI, those disappear too as well. So if you're going to put comments in there, make sure what I did is I saved mine as a script and put it in my source control, and then I would let it deploy. And then at least I had comments in source control, even if I didn't have it in SQL Server. So that way I would know why I put a certain filter into something, like this is filtering out this in particular, and because otherwise you don't know why you did something. And come up with a consistent way to test things so you can test it against diverse workflows. Because I use Workload Tools by John Luca out in Italy, and you can capture a production workload, take a snapshot of your databases, restore them down to dev, and replay this workload and get a consistent workload test against it and get an audit that actually works against your production workload, and know you're actually auditing what actually runs in production against a workload that's against productionized data. Of course, you want to scrub the production data so it doesn't have PI data and all that good fun stuff, or make sure no one has access to it when you have it in your test environment that shouldn't have access to it. And make a documentation of everything that goes along with it, and maintain it. Again, you want to probably put in source control so you can have comments in it and document it on wiki page so people know how to use it and all that good fun stuff. And your main energy bloaters on SQL Audit are just having big logs because you try to read them and write to them and it slows things down. Having things misconfigured can hamper performance. One misconfiguration that I think hampers performance, even though it's really not a performance enhancement, it takes your performance decreaser, it just takes your server down, is don't set it up where if there's something wrong with SQL Audit, it shuts SQL down. That's just, I don't like that setting, even though the auditors love it. And just not having enough filtering set up. Don't ever implement something that an auditor compliance person gives you cold turkey on production without actually, configuring it yourself. So some performance monitoring techniques, because real-time performance will give us instantaneous feedback and alerts of any abnormalities that we might have, but we need historical performance analysis too. So you'll want to take some historical data, set it aside, know how your system's performed for the last month, so that you can compare something to how it's performing now for the past week and go back and go, hey, yeah, this is actually what's happening in our metrics. You want to use optimization tools to tailor your needs to your audits, and just do regular audits of your performance and see if things have changed because your amount of data you're collecting from SQL Audit has changed. Now, over time, your allocated resources needs might change. You might have to have more dedicated memory and CPU to handle SQL Audit, depending on your needs, because you may not be able to filter out as much as I was able to filter out. And make sure you don't overburden your system. You may have to prioritize your audits to only run during certain times, or you may have to filter it down because you don't have the resources. You want to make sure you have efficient tools to optimize the distribution and to evaluate the audits that are there. If you don't have the tools to read the data and pull it in because the data is too big to actually read it because you didn't filter enough, and you can't evaluate how much data is there to see if there's anything off, it doesn't do you much good. And you want to constantly analyze your system responses to the various data that you're collecting and make sure it's actually performing the way you want it. Otherwise, you need to adjust it. And again, we'll recognize that to prevent our performance strains, we want to make sure we're auditing at the right depth. We want to make sure we're monitoring things, and we want to use anything we can to optimize things and capture the right performance metrics to be able to do these things. And you want to measure the percentage of your resource utilized by SQL Audit by going through your I/O, memory, and CPU. You want to look at your log volume and make sure that the data you generate daily, weekly, and monthly is about the same as it was the last day, weekly or monthly, that you were looking at. Your latency and your audit reporting, it should take the time for a given event occurrence to report the generation, so it could be near real-time reporting so that you actually know when an event occurred. That's kind of hard because this is a manual process to get reporting. So you can't have too much data, otherwise you would never know when something actually occurred. And you got to make sure you're utilizing the disk properly, because again, all this data is stored on disk until you put it into a database and do reporting. So you got to make sure you don't use up all the disk and roll over the files too soon to get to the data. And you got to make sure you have the right alert frequency once you do get the data back into something where you can alert it, because you don't want to get false positives on something as well if the things aren't correct for what you need. So now we'll talk a little bit about how you would go about setting up the Heroes Command Center or centralized reporting, because there is no centralized reporting on-prem. You just set it up on a per instance basis, even per database basis, per server basis, and then you have multiple audits going because it's per thing, and then you've got to put all this mess together. You got like 20 balls on one server if you got 20 databases. So our superhero has no command center, basically. So we got to build one for him. He needs a bat cave. So basically, we have a need for centralization because there isn't one. So the basic infrastructure basics is we need hardware and software to support this. So what I've done at companies is I've used my CMS server, my central management server, and used my DBA database or whatever database I use for DBA stuff there to actually import all my audit logs into one database there. And this gives me a little bit of scalability and flexibility because I usually have my CMS server set up as a duplicate on another CMS server and use DBA tools to sync the CMS parts for the MSDB and then set up the other part as an AG so I can fail over and all that stuff. So I do have a backup of it as well. Fancy stuff, because I'm a DBA and I like to have redundancy. But that gives me a little bit of scalability and flexibility so that I can actually, do read only off the DBA database if I want to, and just do writes to it as well. And that allows me the advantage of being able to write the reports into that system and get quick access and response to it. But I can set up PowerShell to automatically go out and read the data and put it right into the database on the fly. So by overcoming these fragmented challenges, we can understand our risk and stuff better. So we would want to do this by, helping us come up with a unified crusade for our superhero. This is how SQL Audit brings our coherence to our chaos. We get our data sources galore. We recognize all our potential audit data sources. So we got 90 servers. We bring them all into one location using our PowerShell. This gives us data integrity because we're ensuring our completeness and trustworthiness because all our data is unified. And we get our benefits reaped by, we will have increased efficiency and better insights, and we have bolstered security by bringing all our data together and getting reported by not having our buildings all over the place in 90 servers and trying to report on 90 different servers. So our blueprint for the command center would be, our design policy would be to streamline this and make it as robust as possible. And our central hub, again, would be that CMS server. So as far as the PowerShell goes, DBA Tools has a command that can read the files for you, or you can use a link server if you're not comfortable with PowerShell, and just use a link server. I've done it both ways. I use PowerShell or link server, and I have a list of my database servers in the CMS server, and I just iterate through those. Either if I use PowerShell, I iterate through those and tell it to go out and read everything that's in the SQL audits and import it into tables in the CMS. If I don't have, if I wasn't comfortable with PowerShell, I would create me a table inside my DBA database, list all my servers, and then use my link server to go out, because I would use my same name for my link server and tell it to go out to each one of those and read all my data in that way. So you'd have to write your own custom process for that. Now, the book I'm going to reference at the end that Josephine wrote actually has her process for doing link servers in there if you want to use it. So that it's already pre-written, you just have to get the book. So, small price to pay. Then you can actually set up an email that emails you any data you want. She has that script in there as well. So that can be used for the PowerShell or the other method. And then this offers you the scalability because you can, do this, it be ready and adapt, and you can increase your data streams to anything you want to do because you've wrote it and you can do what you want to it. This can be easily stuck in Power BI or any other reporting system you want because now you have it in a database table. You filtered it out. You can do what you want with it. And you can distribute it to anybody you want at that point. Because now you can assemble the reports in any way you want. You've collected the data from all your different sources. You've ensured nothing is missing. You can filter it out at this point to anything that's necessary that needs to be reported. Like, people access and store procedures. If it's certain store procedures that you don't need to worry about, fine, don't worry about it. But if there's certain actions in there that you see that are unusual, like configuration changes that you want to see that are happening, report on it. Or you can just provide a summary and compare it from day to day and go, oh, this looks different. Let's go research it. You decide what you want to see based on your reports. And you can convert all this raw data in some sort of visualization. You could say, okay, this many stored procedures are executed on this day, or this many selects were happening on this day, and see if there's a significant change in activity across the databases. And if there's a significant change, hey, maybe someone got into the system that wasn't supposed to be in the system because a whole bunch of extra activity occurred. It could be nothing. It could be an anomaly that needs to be investigated. And you've got all this aggravated data that you can put in nice, friendly reports. You can show it to management. Management likes friendly, pretty reports with pictures. And you can distribute these reports automatically, which makes it nice. I forgot to ask if anybody had questions a few times. I'm sorry. But I didn't see any chat either. So anybody have any questions?
Chat.
That's what messed me up, was I didn't see any chat. Okay. Well, now we're coming to the end, so we've talked about the superhero having his pivotal moments and tuning his innate abilities and stuff, but basically this is the summary part of it. The common pitfalls and overcoming them is, one is underestimating what SQL that underestimating what SQL Audit will do is just turning it on, like my coworker did, and turning this on in production and it going down while I was out of work. It does take some configuration and making sure that it's not doing too much. And that goes with the overlogging. You can capture too much data, leading to storage issues and just noise that you can't look at and you don't know what to do with. Neglecting security, failing to set adequate permissions and leading to people having too much access to change stuff, and then you're still recording too much data. And ignoring the performance impact. Some people like stick it on there and who cares about the resource consumption, and then your servers are overworked. And lacking regular reviews to see what's changing over time, set it and forget it type attitude, can lead to some problems. So, you want to schedule your periodic reviews to make sure things like that aren't happening. And just some wisdom and nuggets to, lessons learned from the back cave, embrace your mistakes. Like my coworker who, doing production, he won't do that again. And we won't accidentally put on the setting that shuts down the SQL Server if it runs out of space. Things we won't do. Every error is a lesson waiting to be learned. So you just analyze your mistakes and learn from them. Stay updated with the things that are happening in the security world. There might be things that come up that you learn, and you might find out that implementing SQL Audit or changing something in your SQL Audit strategy might help you. Trust and verify all your information. The security world's full of stuff. Things are constantly changing. Security is vitally important these days, and I don't think we pay enough attention to it at all. Unfortunately. So, more your queries, shared adventures, collective growth, whatever you want to share your wisdom or whatever. But here's a QR code to Josephine's book if you are so inclined to learn a whole lot more about SQL Audit, including it in Azure. She has tons of stuff in Azure. If anybody wants the book, it's Practical Database Auditing for Microsoft SQL Server and Azure SQL. Here's some links to her blog stuff, my blog stuff. And I forgot to do my examples too. I'm forgetting stuff. Y'all want to see examples? I assume so. Let's not do calendar.
Yes.
So I did do examples. So when I did the STIG audit or the DISA compliance stuff, you can see this, right? My blog?
Again, yeah.
Okay, just making sure. Sometimes I end up sharing only PowerPoint, not the monitor, so I always have to make sure. So this is my complicated SQL STIG audit thingy that I had to implement. See how complicated? This is all the little specifications they had. So I put that's why I put comments there, because like they had 4 specifications for one thing. It had 180 like specifications, and there's a whole bunch of them. So if I turned it on like this, it killed my system. This is the default. Just like turn everything on and leave it alone. This is like track every database and do everything under the sun. It's like, no, we can't do that. So we went through and we found that, like, doing every select, insert, delete, and update was just no. And we turned off our monitoring software and replication and all that stuff. So we changed some things. We told it to reserve to disk space. We did 50 rollover files, and we only did 100 megabyte files. So we could easily do this. So, but one thing we did after we turned this on, is this is me doing it on my local system, but you can query this file. And what I did is I grouped it by these action IDs. So this told me where the most activity was occurring on my system, so I could decide what to filter out. there's no point in filtering anything out if nothing's happening. So based on that, there's this link right here that someone in my user group I found, because these aren't documented on Microsoft's website anywhere. I couldn't find these action IDs with the corresponding numbers documented anywhere. So when you go here, these action IDs are somewhere documented on here, but these numbers are important. If you don't have these numbers, you can't filter anything. It's really weird how they got all this stuff documented. But you need these numbers in order to filter things out, and they got things weirdly documented, and it's so much fun.
They never make it easy, huh?
No, they did not make this easy at all. So after I did this, like I seen like VSST, and I was like, what is that? I know this one's Select SL. So I went and I queried the VSSTs out. And I didn't have telemetry turned off on my personal laptop. That's what all the VSSTs is telemetry. So I just turned telemetry off in this case. But going back to what I did at work, is I found DBCC was my top one at work. Then that was my monitoring software. So I told it, where the principal server name is not my monitoring software, turn it off. And where my session principal name is not this, and the action ID is not this, because there were still some that even though I told it to leave my monitoring software out, it was still recording stuff. It does not audit data. Well, I take that back. I don't think well, that's a good question. Inspections, protections, audit data. It doesn't record audit data. Well, you've got to control who sees the audited data. As you can't filter out what actually gets recorded. So you got to control who sees the audit data. That's why only certain people have access to the audit data. Onto that question.
Is there a default setting to like that?
It's an extended
sysadmins
it's an extended event. So sysadmins have it and the security people have it. The security admin group.
Sure. And I'm sure like if you're storing it in a database, then that's totally dependent on the database permissions.
Yeah. And whoever can get to the audit file in the local system if you're storing it locally, and whoever can get to the application or security log if you're storing it there.
Okay.
So you do have to secure the locations of all the data yourself.
Lock it down. Give it to your app admins and then specific DBAs.
Yeah.
Lock it down.
And this was the other thing. This is more of the stuff I filtered out. Like I filtered out all the replication stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like I said, I still found one replication thing that wouldn't filter out this particular DBC thing. This is the same DBC thing from up here that won't filter out. I can't remember what it was. But that one DBC thing was repeated repeatedly. See, look, over and over, this one. And then I found this other one that repeated over and over that I had to specifically filter it out, even though I filtered out the username. I had to filter it out again.
Gotcha.
It's really weird. But you had to go to his website to get the particular action ID that corresponded into here to figure out. Actually, we can probably look what it is if we wanted to. I think it's in his website if we wanted to, but we probably don't. We probably shouldn't. So everybody's not on here forever. But then there was other stuff I filtered out too, but this is the basics. Like I got rid of replication. I got rid of the monitoring. I got rid of some other stuff. But I just kind of took this, I whittled it down, and then I queried out whatever was in each category and decided from there what else to whittle out, and just kept going until there was nothing not important in there. Then I have this one I did one day. This is not related to a particular audit, but one day there was somebody who wanted to know a particular record was getting updated to be active again. Basically, someone was turning back on a machine in our company, and no one knew who was doing it or what was doing it. So I was like, I can do this. I've been doing audit for 3 months. This is easy.
Oh God.
So this is so easy. So I went in here and I said, this is a totally different scenario. I just went into like sales table here and said, I did the schema here, but sales table, and let's figure out who's auditing the sales table, and just said audit the sales table, and then I would query the sales table, and I looked for the sales table and seen what I looked for this statement to be active, and if someone was changed in the active table, then that was who did it. It was very simple. It took us 10 minutes to find it.
Nice.
So it was just like, you could do it with extended events, but this was so much faster, I think, than extended events. Because I can do this. All I gotta do is like set it to that particular table, look for an update, and then query the file itself and look for the server name was the field in the table, and look for in the statement the word active, and boom, I had it in 10 minutes. And they've been trying to figure this out for months.
Nice. And that's a good segue for a question I have in a minute, but I actually want to go back to Rob Kraft's question a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I was saying you can't hide the sensitive data.
He's just posted another one. So before I read that, I want to ask mine that relates to his. Is there kind of audits, and I haven't explored this because I usually, the auditing that I do is for very specific things. It's more like who's touched this, not what data is in this. So looking at Rob's question, how I read it, because I've done like a bunch of healthcare data stuff in the past. And, when you have healthcare data, you've got, some PII information and stuff like that, as I'm sure you're familiar with.
Two healthcare companies in a row I'm at.
Yep. So so kind of with that in mind, when you think about SQL audit, is there any of that, the physical data being passed through, that you might have to also, oh wait, stop, I've got to think, are my app admins allowed to see this in this log? Or is that just not even in the logs? You're looking at
it's whatever statement is ran is in the logs, but
okay,
you could choose,
but not the data, just the statement.
Well, if you passed in,
if you did a hard code of something
there, yeah,
where patient equals
yeah, if you
Tracy.
did that, it's there. I mean, whatever you execute,
you got a different problem if you're doing that. So
yeah, so
gotcha.
But that's why you secure wherever you're logging the data.
Yeah,
wherever you're
but
logging
it does
the SQL Audit
put in
data.
mind, like, oh, so in my contracts and stuff, I'm going to have to make sure my app admins have these type of security clearances or whatever may be the case.
Yeah.
If that's
well, that's why. But I mean, SQL
study.
Audit is technically approved by the powers to be, the HIPAA people and the high trust people and all that stuff. So it's an approved method for collecting it.
Sure. Yeah, I did a lot of work for the CDC, and you talk about red tape. if it's US data, it's like
yeah, trust me. Trust me, the stick stuff was fun. 3 months to implement an audit. One audit.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, that sounds about right. That sounds right.
Yeah. Well,
like when you talk about why does things work slow in IT and government, it's because all the red tape, because the people want it. They want that auditing stuff, but the red tape and the processes that go with that, people don't understand how long it takes.
Ours was the performance piece, because literally we threw it into production while I was at the doctor, and it took production down. Because it was here deployed everywhere, and I was like, no. Because what happened is we had a meeting the night before, and it was discovered that it hadn't been implemented anywhere, and they thought it had. And I was like, no, it hadn't. And I was like, don't panic. Because it was showing that we had 168 things that weren't done on DISA. And I was like, yeah, but like 160 of those are SQL Audit. We can do this in no time. We just need to do some testing. But they panicked and threw it in production. I was like, oh. And I got back and it's like, we took production down. And I'm like, oh, okay. We can fix this. So I was like, we just need to do some testing. But for me to get QA away from QA people to do a real test took a significant effort, which is why it took so long. It wasn't necessarily just the filtering and stuff, but trying to filter it down and then get the data back from QA and run another test and keep going back and forth with that just, took some time. And then to get clearance from the auditors for the particular filters to be in there and stuff. Cause I was like, I'm not going to sit there and give them, stuff from the monitoring software. They don't need to, that's just dumb data. It's going to be there no matter what. They don't need to see Century One or DPA or any of those particular Datadog or any of those particular softwares doing the normal stuff it's doing. It's not an end user doing stuff or an application that's accessing data doing stuff. Just like they don't need to see the replication running as a system process. I took, that type of stuff they don't need to see. So I took out the stuff that's not necessary as much as possible. I whittled it down, like, taking down production to no impact. But you couldn't even tell it was running.
And I know
the files were minuscule.
Rob has another question that is far outside my purview, so I'll let you kind of read that out loud and address that.
We have web apps and all users use the same connection string to hit the database. Do you have a recommendation on how we could track individual users in that setup? What should we change? You're not going to be able to track that with SQL Audit. So the only thing that you can do if you want to track anything in those cases is the best thing you're going to be able to do for tracking that stuff. And I believe Josephine does cover this briefly in her book, or she may cover it more. I'm not 100% sure. I have the book in there somewhere, autographed copy. But you could put triggers in there that have the, last updated person and timestamp, and use temporal tables if you're on 2016 and above. I think temporal tables came in. That way, every time it gets updated, it keeps up with what changed, and then it would timestamp who did it based on you passing in a username, but you would have to know who logged in and do all that stuff. But that's going to take code to get the user in there, and the timestamp would be automatic, but you'd have to pass in a user to whatever updated it. And then you use temporal tables to actually keep the change itself of what it was before it got changed. But that's not going to be part of SQL Audit.
And that connection string, Rob, and you can come off mute if you want. Are you like, in that connection string, does everybody kind of log on as the same person? Are they logging on with that connection string as individual kind of AD groups or AD, or users? How is that? Because go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty typical that you have one connection string that all the users share.
Yeah.
So when you're going through a web app.
But that connection string, do you know how, like, is it just kind of using like, oh, it's using the service account to connect, or is it actually using like an AD user or something like that?
It's typically using a service account. It could be an AD user, but even then it's going to be a service account that's set up in Active Directory.
Most of the time, those are all the same. Every app I've ever had has always been one user coming in. So.
Yeah, and that gives you performance advantage because they all have the same connection string they pool in the application. So
if it's logging in as that one, that's its official login, I think, unless Tracy, you have something else.
No.
Yeah, pretty much all of our inserts and updates in our case, we are passing in an updated by or inserted by person. But our selects, we certainly don't have anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be the tough part, is monitoring the selects by user. Trying to think.
Okay, I just didn't know if there was if you'd run across something for that scenario.
I would have no clue how to implement this, but I almost wonder if there's something, because like switching to a completely different thing, Like Power BI will let me know what users are hitting different things. Even though it's using some, often using a data source string with one service account. So I wouldn't know, but there may be something really deep down in there that somebody might know about.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but the Power BI report, they're logging in the front end as themselves, and the back end's hitting it with one source. So
For
that's why. But the Power
service,
BI, you're
not
logging in.
necessarily as report. Oh yeah, even with
The
reports.
front end, you're logging in as yourself. The back end of the report
Yeah.
itself's logging in with the connection string, but the front end, you're still logging in as yourself on Power
Yeah.
BI.
You're right. I
That's
was
why that
thinking
one's
along
doing it.
Power BI report server, but that's still the case, even though it's not that's an AD account, not,
Yeah,
a cloud account. So it's still the same thing. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. So there's some sort of mechanism that keeps up with that one, but I can't think of a mechanism to do it. I have to think on that one. I think on it. There's got to be something somewhere.
Okay,
That'd be
there
tough.
maybe that you could add something to the connection string. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we could. I don't know if that would impact performance, if it impact the connection pooling ability.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in that web connections, in that connection string, even though it's connecting via a singular account, I would imagine there's some security that allows them to connect via that security account somewhere along the line.
I don't know. We'll figure it out one day and let you know. There's got to be a way. Oh,
Yes,
what is there a particular framework you're using? Like, are you using entity framework or anything like that?
We're using something like Entity Framework though.
But sometimes something like that might have stuff.
Yeah, Entity Framework by default just has the same problem I'm talking about. It's using a connection string that's shared by all the users in the web app.
Yeah. I was just trying to think sometimes they have weird different things that you can set. So I didn't know. I was just trying to just in case I run across something.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was an answer. I've run across the question before and didn't come up with the answer, and your talk reminded me of it again. But this was
Yeah.
great information. There's a lot to think about, a lot more than I expected if you're going to really implement an audit.
Yeah. There's a lot more I could talk about too.
Yeah. I loved your part on granular auditing because I know SQL audit can give you, just like you were saying, just a deluge of data. So, you talked a little bit about filtering. So what kind of advice would you give to somebody that, like, we want to know who's touching my database or my table or etc. And that's like, you don't have other filters other than I just want to know who's doing this, these selects or execute because I've got to kill all these reports and I need to know who is affecting. Well, how would you kind of limit that? How would you advise, like, here's some things you can do granular, or is there any, like, is that just too broad of a statement?
No, that last example I gave you, that's just doing one table.
Okay.
So if you wanted to, if somebody needs something in particular, you could narrow it down to a table, a list of stored procedures, a list of tables, and a particular list of functions. If you just need to know who is selecting what tables or executing those specific stored procedures, you can narrow it down to just those in one particular database.
Yeah, we have a system, we have like several reporting systems and we're trying to consolidate into just Power BI. So I'm not managing many reporting systems unnecessarily. And before we kill things, we're like, well, we kind of need to know who's using what. So
Yep, you can do that.
at best, it wouldn't necessarily be a stored procedure because it was not set up properly that way. But at best, it's like, okay, who's just doing, select statements across, on these things that we know XYZ reports use. And
Yeah.
that's, but like you said, I mean, when I look at and I have to go through that log, it's like, oh, there's gotta be a better way.
Yeah,
That's a lot of
if you need to know
information.
who's selecting what, if you need to know like who's selecting anything in the database, that's real easy to set up. You can do a select on the schema.
Yeah, that's what I
for-
have. I have the execute and select on the schema, but I was thinking like, I wonder how I would filter this down because that's a
Well,
lot
you
of
can,
stuff to go through.
well, you can do the query based on the you can function out the, wait a minute, let me share my screen again. Right here, you got object name. Group
Okay.
it by that.
Yep, I'm familiar with that. Okay, cool.
Just group it by that, and
Oh,
don't show your statement.
Can you
gotta
put
do
the
is-
link for that in the chat?
Yeah.
I'm so
It's at the end of my slide deck too, but you don't have
Is
my
it?
slide deck yet. So, but yeah, just use that statement in there and just modify it. Where's my chat at?
Awesome.
But just
Oh,
modify that statement and do a group by on the object name, and then you can find out who's selecting the most stuff, or just do a distinct.
yeah. No, well, it'll be helpful because it also is like, oh, well, 3 users are using this report.
Yeah.
I can definitely kill it and just let them know.
Just
Do this over here.
Do a top one, figure out what your columns are. I mean, so you know
Yeah.
what columns you want to return, and then do a distinct on whatever columns you want to see, and or do a group by so you know how many times it's been executed since your time frame, and put whatever time frame you want in there, and boom. That's what I kept doing, was I kept using that particular function and filtering down and grouping by, and going through that with that first example I gave. I kept using that particular select and just changing the group by and until I figured out what I wanted. But yeah, if you've got the audit already set up, that's all you gotta do is play with that
Yeah, I
function
do.
and do the selects on it.
Good. This is definitely something
Piece
I'm
of
going to
cake.
assign to somebody else on my team.
Piece
Be
of
like,
cake.
hey, we need this when you're looking at those reports to go here and look this, do this.
Piece of cake. That was easy.
I set it up, you go look.
You set it up. Here's the select statement. Here's how to get
That's
started.
awesome.
I watched this presentation last night. She
That's
has
right.
a select statement right in the middle of her blog post.
That's right. Absolutely. I realized at the beginning of your presentation when you said like SQL Audit is your guardian and hero, that I was like, Tracy, you are SQL Audit.
I've been having fun with my presentations. I've been trying to SQL hero or theme
That's
them in
right.
some way.
You are the guardian and the hero, so you are SQL Audit.
So I've been trying to theme all my presentations. I database themed Atomic Habits for Summit. It was fun.
I love it. Yeah, that was great.
It was fun. You should. My next one's going to be even more fun for you guys. Oh, it's going to be fun, not more fun, but fun that I'm doing for you guys.
Love it.
How did I theme my Azure one? I don't remember. Oh, rowdy toddlers are in it.
Oh, I love that. Fantastic. Be sure to catch
I just
that.
been having fun.
That's what you should be, right? You got it.
It was just like, hey, I got tired of the boring presentations. If I read my script that I have in the slide notes, it'd be even more corny than it was. Because I have all kinds of corny things to say in my slide notes. I'm like, I can only remember, but
I'm full of corn, but I'm in Iowa, so it's okay. Point in case.
You don't have any corn right now, from what I heard on the news. It's 30 below last night.
It's all white, covered in white. If it's there, we can't see it.
I don't know if you had white. I just know it was 30 below. That's what I heard.
It's pretty cold. I don't know if I've seen 30, but I have seen feels like 43 when I just returned from my trip.
You
And
said
I was
it was
like
30 below last night for the Caucasus.
Oh, yeah.
And the brave people that went out.
I didn't go out, so no.
I didn't either. Yeah,
Once it reaches
wasn't
certain
30 bucks.
degrees, I'm like, I'm not looking, not going out, doesn't affect me.
But yeah. But yeah, that's your select statement right there. I hope. Yeah, it's got object name right there, and boom, you're good to go.
Beautiful, love it. All right, so I think we're a little bit over time, but well worth it for sure. Thank you so much as always.
No problem.
We appreciate you speaking for our group, and we look forward to your next visit.
All right. See you, I think, in March.
I believe so. I haven't looked
I think my
in
brain
detail,
remembers
but
it. Don't
yeah.
worry. My brain remembers most things
Mine doesn't.
accurately.
Doesn't.
Semi-accurately, anyways.
My brain is OneNote.
Well, my brain has ClickUp too to help me, and I just happened to have went through ClickUp right before here. ClickUp's my project management system for my life.
Nice. ClickUp. I have to look that up.
Yeah, it's
Sounds
just
good.
my massive. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects, and then there's all kinds of projects inside of projects, and now I can mark something complete. Look, I did this presentation. How do you think I remember anything?
I swear I need to do outtakes from some of these videos and make a compilation of outtakes.
Why? What did I
do? Awesome. All right. Before people, my 10-year-olds start knocking on the door for a late dinner, I should probably sign off and thank everyone who joined us, and especially you, Tracy. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you,
All
Tracy.
right, talk to you later. No problem. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.